Hi, I'm Teresa Jackson, a master at the Arcanum. I'm a self-professed Photoshop junkie and I love making composites. If you're somebody who's got a basic handle on Photoshop but you haven't tried any composites yet and you're thinking you really want to try one but you're not sure where to start, then I made this tutorial for you. I'm using an image that was created by an artist, Jerry Uelsmann, as an inspiration to create the composite for the tutorial. If you're thinking you've never heard of Jerry, you need to pause this right now, go do a Google search, and then come back after you've learned how it is he created this image. You're back. You've done your Google search and your mind's blown because you discovered that Uelsmann created this image without the use of Photoshop, which is just crazy when I think about that. We have Photoshop, so it's going to be a lot easier. So let's jump right in and get started. Okay, let's get started with this composite. And the best place to start a composite is inside of your Lightroom catalog, because your Lightroom catalog is where you have organized your entire life, right? All of the images that you've been taking for years are here, and they've all been meticulously keyworded so that you can easily find exactly what you're looking for. We need to create a place to put the images for our composite once we've found the ones that we want to use. And the best place to put those is in a collection. We want to create a collection for our composite. It's a good idea maybe to have a collection set for your composites, and then you can add a bunch of collections in there. So let's get started and create a collection. We go to the plus, we say create collection, and then we need to give it a name that makes sense for our project. So we'll call this Ode to Uelsmann, and I apologize to Jerry if I mispronounced his name. I probably did. I probably even misspelled it, but no, I think I got it right. So we have a name for our collection, and we want to put the collection inside of a collection set. So I'm going to scroll down here and pick composites. I don't want to include any selected photos because I haven't started looking for the right photos. So anything that might be selected here isn't going to be what I need for this composite. So I'll click create, and you'll see here that the new collection is in the collection set composites. All right, let's make sure that we are in the library module. And then we want to go up here to catalog and select all photographs. And now all the photographs in my catalog are visible here. While you're in the library module, the / key on your keyboard will bring up the filter bar where you can search by keyword. If you don't see this option down here where it says text keywords, make sure that you've selected on the word text here, and then you can type in the keyword of what you're looking for. And the first image that we need is a lake, so I'm going to type in lake and hit the enter. Now this pulled up a bunch of images of lakes that I have in my catalog, but it also pulled up some family pictures because I happen to have family members by the name of Lake. So I need to refine this even further. I'm going to go up to the filter bar here and put a comma and then refine this with the keyword water. And now I need to change up here where it says keywords contain. If I click here, I can say contain all. And now all those family pictures are gone and we just have lake pictures. I can further refine this by going down here to the bottom where we have the filters, and I can filter for images that are flagged. So I'm going to click on the flag, and now my search is getting a lot easier. And inside of this selection, I have a perfect image right here. Well, maybe not perfect. It's not as good as the one that that Jerry used in his composite, but it'll work for this demonstration. It has a basic mirror. Let's go to the loop view with the E on my keyboard. All right, so this lake image will work just fine. It's got a somewhat of a mirrored composition vertically and horizontally, and that's basically what I was looking for to recreate the same type of composition that Jerry Uelsmann did with his. So I'm going to add this to the collection by coming down here to the film strip and clicking inside of this image and then just dragging it up to the collection until I get a plus sign and then let go. And now you'll see in this collection it has one image. Now we need to go through the catalog and find the next two images. I need a rock and I need a ripple of water. I didn't want to bore you with another catalog search, so I went out and found the images that I need. I have the lake. I found this great image of a rock that I shot off the bridge of San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, looking down at the rocks. Isn't that perfect for this? And then I found a ripple of water. But I'll let you in on a secret here. This isn't my photo. I didn't have any photos like this in my collection. So I went to stock photography and I found this image on a site called Dollar Photo Club. That's right, all the images are just $1. And I purchased it because it's perfect for this composite. And there's nothing wrong with going out and finding stock images to work on your composites. It's a good idea to start in Lightroom and do some pre-edits to the images before you bring them into Photoshop for your composite. And this ripple is just fine. We're just going to use it as like a textural overlay, so it's fine like it is. So I'm going to leave it alone. And this rock, all I really need is the big rock. I don't need the small rock, so I might as well crop it. So I'm going to go to the Develop module, and that's with the D on the keyboard. And then I'm going to go to the Crop, which is this tool right here. And I'll just crop this in by pulling the sides in, and we're going to mask this out so I can crop it in pretty tight because all I need is just the rock. And then I'll say done right down here, and now that's cropped. I also think it looks a little bit flat. I mean, I want this composite to have lots of contrast and lots of gritty texture because I love that. So I'm going to take this clarity and just crank it all the way to 100%, and I'm liking this much, much better. It's still just a little bit dark, so I'll open the shadows up a little bit. Maybe I'll open the shadows up and take the blacks down, and that'll give it a little better contrast. I'm really liking the way this is looking a lot better now. Another tip here, if you know you're going to have to mask an image in your composite, if you have nice sharp edges like this does, the masking is so much easier. Okay, so let's look at the lake image. I used the arrow on my keyboard to move to the left to get to the lake. And we'll close this side out over here so that we have a nice big preview. Now this is a little underexposed. And I know I want this sky to be totally white because we're going to fill it with the water, with the ripple. So let's take the exposure up. I'm going to go ahead and take the clarity up on this too so we get some nice contrast. And maybe I'll open the shadows up a little bit. And if I really want to make this sky white, I can go to my graduated filter here and reset it by double clicking on Effect. See, that changes to reset. So now all of these sliders are back to 0 or back to the middle. And I'm going to take the exposure way up. I don't know how much until I actually put it in there, but we'll just crank that way up and then pull down a graduated filter, and now I've just got this nice white sky, which is what I'm looking for. Let's move this up so we keep a little bit of the trees, and then I'll say done. I'm gonna hit the J on my keyboard to see my clipping, and this is completely white. I'm totally fine with that. That's gonna be other stuff composited in there, but I don't really have any blacks in this image. We don't have. If we look at the histogram up here, nothing is hitting the left side, so we have no black. So I'm going to take the black slider to the left until we start seeing that mask, that blue mask come in there, and that tells me that I have some black. So now I have my 3 images, and we're ready to jump out to Photoshop and start the composite. We all know that you can open an image from Lightroom into Photoshop with a Command E or a Control E, or you can find that in your menu bar up here if you go to Photo, Edit in Photoshop. But I don't want to do that here because I have 3 images. And if I went through this process, I would end up in Photoshop with 3 separate documents instead of all of them in a single document. So we have a much, much better way to do this. Use your Shift key and select everything in the film strip across the bottom. So all 3 of these are selected. And then go up to Photo, Edit in, but instead of choosing Edit in Adobe Photoshop, go down here to the bottom and say open as layers in Photoshop, and this is fabulous because it will open each of these images and then place them into a Photoshop document as individual layers, which is exactly what you need for your composite. All right, we're in Photoshop. We have all three of our images on three separate layers. And so let's organize our layers. Let's start by putting the lake on the bottom because that's what we're going to build up from. And let's focus on the lake to start. So I'm going to hide the water and the rock. And if you want to be really organized about your compositing, which I really recommend, name your layers. So this is the lake and this is the water. And I'm just double clicking on it to highlight it so that I can then type in a name. So we have the rock, the water, and the lake. And let's zoom out, and I'm using the keyboard shortcut Command and Spacebar to get to my zoom tool, and then I'm going to use the scrubby zoom by scrubbing to the left. I like using this method for zooming in and out. So now we can see this image, and what's the first thing you notice is this is a horizontal, but the inspiration that we're trying to follow here is vertical. So we need to crop this image. And I know you're thinking, well, why didn't you do that in Lightroom? You can crop in Lightroom, right? I know somebody out there is thinking that. Well, there's a really good reason, because in Photoshop, when we go to the crop tool, there's something we can do here that you can't do in Lightroom. Let's start by putting a ratio in. When I go to the crop tool, which is the fifth tool down here, we can type in a ratio. And I'm guessing that the image we're trying to copy is, maybe it was printed 16 by 20. So I'm going to type in a 16 by 20 ratio. And now when I drag out my crop, however big I make it, it's at that ratio 16 by 20. So we can crop this, but this is what we can do here that we can't do in Lightroom, and that is we can crop to expand the canvas. You can crop to make a canvas or an image smaller, but you can also crop to expand it. And I want to add a whole bunch of sky up here. So compositionally, I want the center right in the center. I want to center this right down the center of this, and maybe right at the 1/3. So I've got 2/3 sky, 1/3 water. And one really important thing to check when you're using the crop tool is make sure that this delete cropped pixels is unchecked. And by default, that's going to be on. And if it's on, you'll lose all of this over outside of the crop area, and then you can't come back and change your mind. And I love being able to change my mind at a later time. So I'm just going to click the big check up here and commit that crop. And now our canvas is vertical, just like we need. Before I go any further with this, I want to save this document as a Photoshop file. Right now, if I look at the name up here, it's got the name of the stock image from Dollar Photo Club. So I'm going to go up to File, Save As, and then I'm going to navigate to a place where I want to save it. Once I've found the folder where I want to save this image, I need to give it a name that makes sense. And I definitely don't want to call it Dollar Photo Club, so we'll call it Uelsmann Composite, something that makes sense. And then down here under Format, I like to save my layered Photoshop files as a Photoshop file document, not a TIFF file. And there's a lot of debate out there on that, which I don't want to get into. But me personally, I like to use Photoshop. That tells me that I know it has layers in it. I want to make sure I include the layers, and then I'll just say save. After this image is done saving, we'll see the name change up here at the top. Now that I have this cropped and I'm taking a better look at it, I really don't like this bush down here in the corner. I could clone it out, but I think I'll just scale up the whole lake image so it fills the space a little bit better. So I want to make sure that I have the lake layer selected, and then I'm going to go Command T, which is the free transform. And then here's a really cool thing. If you option or click right in the point that you want to hold in place, I'll option click right here in the center. And then if I go up here to my toolbar at the top, I can lock the dimensions, height and width, and then just scrubby across either one of those, and it will zoom out from the point that I clicked on from the center. So I'll just scale this up so it fills that space a lot better. Whoops, went way too far. Sometimes it gets a little crazy. So that looks good. And then we'll click the check. And now we're ready to get started with a composite. The first thing we need to do is fill this sky, and the easiest way to do that is content aware fill. I went to my marquee selection. I'm going to just draw a big square across there and then shift delete. And that brings up the fill dialog box. And if you don't see content aware here under contents, click on it until you can select the content aware. And make sure mode is normal and opacity is at 100%, not 1,000. And then say OK. And magically that'll just fill in. I'm going to scale this image up by doing a fit to window, which is a Command 0. So it fills the window here. Let's turn on the layer for the rock and then move the rock layer just above the lake layer. And I'm going to go to my move tool, which is the V on the keyboard, and move this rock someplace in the center here where we can work on it. I'll zoom in even a little bit closer because right now we're just going to be looking at the rock. And what we need to do is put a layer mask on this rock so that it hides all of the background and all we see is the rock. And the easiest way to select something like this, to turn it into a layer mask, is with the quick select tool. That's your fourth tool down here in the toolbar. And the quick select tool, you basically just paint an area that you want to select. I'm going to get a much bigger brush to do this. If I click up here, I can go to a much bigger brush. I like to have the hardness all the way at 100. And the larger brush I have, the faster it's going to select this area. So I'm just going to drag over it, select the whole thing. It's snapping out to those edges. It's doing an awesome job. Because I have nice sharp edges here, it's doing a great job. When you're doing this, make sure you have the layer selected that you actually want to make the selection of. Once you get the majority of it selected, then you need to zoom in. So I'm going to zoom in here, and at this point I need to make my brush smaller. So I'm using the keyboard shortcut that I have programmed into my Wacom to do that. And then I can just add to this. Now, this is just a rock. If I don't get the rock perfect, who's going to know, right? Who's going to know what the edge of the rock was supposed to look like? So I'm just going to go around. Oops, it went too far and it selected the water. And that's fine because I can now switch my brush from the plus to the minus with the Option key or the Alt key. Option for Mac, Alt for PC, and then I can just paint over the area I want to subtract. And then when I take my finger off the keyboard, it goes back to a plus, and I can zoom back in and I can come in here and select these areas. I have a little bit of water in here, so again I'll do the Option and go all the way around. This is looking pretty good. Yeah, I missed a little bit there and I missed a little bit there, but that's totally fine. We'll go Control 0 or Command 0 to fit back in Windows so we can see the whole thing. Before I turn this into a layer mask, I want to go up here to Refine Edge. Let's take a look at the Refine Edge dialog box. There's a few options here. The first one is how the mask views. I'm going to zoom in on this even a little bit closer so we can see. So by default you usually get the overlay view, which is the red. But sometimes that's really not the best way to see the mask. So I'm going to come down here and just turn it to black on white so you can really see what that mask looks like. And we can see that it's pretty jaggy. So for something like this, I like to add a little bit of smoothness to smooth out some of that jagginess. And another thing that I like to do for a mask like this is to shift the edge in. Let's go back to the overlay here. If the mask isn't really tight inside of this rock, I might get some halos, and that's, something that everybody struggles with when they first start compositing. But this is just a rock. It's just a big lump of something. It really doesn't matter. So I'm going to come down here to Shift Edge, and I'm going to take that to a minus. And that's going to move the edge in a little bit and ensure that I don't get any kind of halos around it. So let's change the view back to black on white and see what we get. It's still a little bit jaggy. So I'll take the the smoothness up just a little bit more, and I could add a little bit of feather to it too, so that we have a little bit softer mask here. And at this point, when I'm happy with it, I can output it to a selection. But if I have the correct layer selected, which I do, I have the rock layer selected here, I can go straight to a layer mask. If I click here where it says selection, switch to layer mask, and say OK, now the rock is masked, the background's hidden, and let's go back to fit and window, and we have a nice floating rock right in the center of the image. Isn't that cool? Now we need to spin this rock around upside down and fit it into this space a little bit better. Again, I'm going to use free transform, which is Command T. I get the handles. If I hover out here in the corner, I can spin it around and put it in position. I'm going to make it a little bit skinnier. Maybe I'll even make it a little bit smaller. And I really like this line of this rock coming right down onto this building here. So I'm kind of creating that composition here, this line dropping right down onto the building that's right at the end of the lake. And then I'll click the check mark to commit that, and our rock is in place. Now we need to put the water drop in place. Let's turn the visibility on, select the layer, go to the Move tool, which is the V on the keyboard, select the drop and put it down here in position someplace. And we're going to change the blend mode. In the first blend mode to always try when you're doing composites is overlay. So right now by default it's set to normal. We'll click here, we'll go down to overlay, and we're starting to see that. But the problem is it's giving it this blue tint. I really don't want that blue tint at all. All I really want is the light and dark of the drops. So I'm going to take all the color out of this. And the easiest way to do that is with hue saturation. And I can get to that panel with a Command or Control U. That brings up the hue saturation dialog box, and I can just take the saturation all the way down to nothing and say OK. And now we're not changing this to a blue color because we just have a grayscale of the drop. So again, I'll go to free transform with Command T, and I'll just scale this up so that it fills this position, or it fills this area a little bit better. Now, one of the things that I really liked about the composition in the original that we're copying here is how it wasn't completely mirrored top to bottom. The top drop and the bottom drop weren't exactly lined up the center. And I like this line coming down the rock, so I want to position this so it's like it's a continuation of this line dropping right down into here. I'm happy with that, so I'm going to click the check mark. We see a little bit of edges around because it's not quite filling the width. And the best way to take care of that is with a layer mask. And this layer doesn't have a layer mask right now, but we can add a layer mask at the bottom of the layer panel here. If we click this icon, it adds a layer mask. And it just adds an empty white layer mask, which isn't hiding anything. But we can paint on that layer mask. This is the easiest way to do your composites, is just paint right on your layer masks. I'm in my brush tool. My brush is set to black. I've got a nice big brush. And maybe I can even make sure it's really soft. And I got to this panel with a right click or a control click. To bring this panel up, I have the hardness set to 0. I have a really nice big size. And then I'm just going to go around the edges and paint on the layer mask. Now when you do this, you need to make sure that you have the layer mask highlighted. See the bracket around there, not the pixel layer. So I'm on the layer mask, and I can just feather out those edges, no problem, all the way around there. That's looking pretty good. We're not really seeing that ripple too well because the water is so light down here. So I'm thinking I want to darken this water area up. And the easiest way to darken or lighten an image non-destructively is with an adjustment layer. And I want to add an adjustment layer above the layer of the lake. So I'm going to come over here to my layer panel, and I'm going to select the lake layer so it's highlighted. And then I'm going to go down here to the bottom of my layer panel and click on this white and black half circle. And this brings up all of my adjustment layers, and my favorite one's curves. So we're going to go to curves, and I'm going to take this start point down. Oh, that's looking so much better. I'll even take the middle point down. Oh, so much nicer. As we make the lake darker, these water drops show up a lot better. But I didn't want to make the sky darker. I just wanted to make the water darker. So again, the easiest way to fix that is just to paint right on the layer mask. And I can use this same brush I have. I'm going to zoom this or move this down a little bit, and I'll just paint across the top of this layer mask that automatically came with the curves adjustment layer, and paint that whole area out on the top so that it stays lighter. And then I can maybe readjust this from here and decide whether that's too dark. I double click on the curves part, it'll bring the properties back up, and maybe I go just a little bit lighter on it. Good, I'm really liking that now. Instead of having the sky go completely white like I have it, I think I want a little bit of a gray tint in there. And if I screen back my mask on the curves layer, I can get that effect. So right now in the properties panel, we're seeing the properties for curves. But if I click on the layer mask, the properties panel changes to properties for the layer mask. And we have an option here for density. If I take the density down of the layer mask, you'll see that it starts turning to like a dark gray color here. And what that's allowing is a percentage of the curves to affect what's underneath it. So it's not being completely blocked out. The really nice part about using properties for your masks is that they're completely non-destructive. You can come back at any time and change this. So we'll set that to roughly in that percentage, and we'll see what we get from there. Now we need to make a copy of the water drop layer so that we can put a water drop at the top of the image. So I'm going to select the water drop layer, and I'm going to do a Command or a Control J to make a copy of that layer. And then I need to flip it over to put it on the top. The easiest way to do that is with the Command T for free transform. Just grab the bottom and drag it up, and that flips it upside down. Click in the middle to drag it into place, and then click the check to commit that. Now it's really light because the background's really light, so we need to change to a different blend mode. So I'm going to go under here and pick darken and see what we get. And now that's starting to work. The layer mask that's on this layer that we copied isn't really working up in this position. I want to delete the layer mask. So I'm going to do a control click or a right click right on the layer mask and say delete layer mask. And then I can position this where I want it. This water drop I want to put right in the center of the image because that's how Jerry Uelsmann did his, right? We have this kind of composition that's not quite exactly centered, and I really like that. But the problem is I like how dark this is, but we're having these really harsh edges around here, so we need to fill this in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that content aware fill again to do that, but let's hide all the other layers first. The easiest way to do that is to Option or Alt click right on the eyeball or the visibility for that layer, and it turns all the other ones off. And so now all we're seeing is this layer. I'll go to my marquee with the M on my keyboard, and I'll just drag out a marquee for this section, do a Shift Delete, brings up my fill dialog box, say OK, fills that in, looks great, added a couple little more ripples, that's fine. I'll select all of this, and I need to make sure that it overlays just a little bit, so I'm going to do that again. Shift Delete, say OK. That's okay. We have kind of this weird dark area down here. I'm going to go ahead and just paint that in. I'm going to use the B for the brush. I'm going to use the Option key or the Alt key while I'm in the brush to switch to my eyedropper. I'll sample that color. I'll just paint this area right out with this light gray. And then I'll do a Command D to deselect, and then come back up to my layers panel and Option or Alt click back on the visibility, which turns everything else on. Now it's really starting to look good, don't you think? I'm liking this. The problem is we put the water drops on top of the rock. And the rock really should have the highest priority here. So I'm going to select the rock layer and drag it to the top. So let go up there, and now the rock is on top of everything else. And there's one other problem here. This water drop doesn't make sense up in the sky. Let's zoom in on that. It's like dropping upside down. So I'm going to go to my healing brush tool, which is right here. Then I need to make sure that I have the copied water layer selected in my layers panel. And then I can just paint right over this water drop, let go, boom, gone. If I want to be really picky, I can clean this up a little bit. And that's looking really good. Let's zoom out a little bit, hide this properties here. We've got all the parts in place for this composite, and it's looking pretty awesome. But now we need to deal with the colors and the tones, and this is one of the biggest challenges with doing composites. In the example that we followed, it's black and white. And if you're doing black and white, that alleviates all kinds of problems. We can easily turn this into a black and white if we go to our adjustment layers down here and pick black and white. And that adds a black and white adjustment layer to the top, and now the whole image is black and white. And that's cool, that works, you can do that. But I've got another way that I like to do black and whites. Let me show you that. I think it's better than using the black and white panel. I'm going to do the Command Z to delete that. I'm going to go back to the adjustment layers, and this time I'm going to pick the gradient map, which is down here at the bottom, gradient map. I'm not sure why my system defaulted to a negative gradient map. That's kind of cool. It's not the effect we're after, but it's kind of cool. And the reason why this is creating a negative of this image is the image is being mapped to the gradient that's shown here. So the left is the shadow and the right is the highlight. So this is mapping the shadows to white and the highlights to black. So we're getting a reverse. But if you click on this little triangle here, you'll see that there's lots and lots of gradients in here. And here's another tip for you. If you don't see all these really cool gradients like I have, those are extras. And those extras are hidden under this tiny little gear that it couldn't be any smaller to find, right? If you click on that, there's all kinds of other gradients that you could add to your gradient map selections. And I added these ones called photographic toning. So go in there and find that and add photographic toning, and then you'll get all these wonderful ones. So we could pick this first one, for example, and we get this beautiful kind of sepia tone. And I really like that look, so I'm going to go with that one. But I don't want to apply that sepia tone gradient map at 100% color. I kind of want to fade it in there. And this is a layer, this adjustment layer. We can change all the properties about it. We can change the blend mode and we can change the opacity. And in this case, I just want to change the opacity to screen it back a little bit. If I hover right over the word opacity, I get this scrubby zoom. And I can just scrub to the left. And as I take it down in percentage, we've got a toned down look, and I'm really starting to like the look of it. Yeah, it's not a complete match of what we were copying, but this is my own interpretation of it. Maybe take this down a little bit more so we get just a little bit of color in there. And I'm really liking the way this is looking now. This composite's starting to come together and look really good, but I really want to fine tune it at this point. Specifically, this rock is looking really flat to me, and I want to add some shape to it. And the best way to add shape to your images, to add light or dark, is to just add an adjustment layer. And adjustment layers come with layer masks, so then you can paint them in. So I want to add an adjustment layer to add some brightness to this rock. Let's think about the water as the light source shining up on this rock. So I'm going to go down to my adjustment layer, pick curves, and then we'll just pull this curve up to make it a lot brighter. But the problem is that it's making everything below it brighter. Well, if we hold the Option or the Alt key down, we get this icon change, and that allows us to click right in between the layers, and that clips this adjustment to the mask below. So now the adjustment layer is only being applied inside of the rock. And we can fine tune that even more by painting on the layer mask to hide some of the brightness. So for example, I don't want the top part of the rock to be bright. I only want the bottom part of the rock to be bright. So I want to make sure that my brush is set to black. So I'm going to switch these with my X key, get a bigger brush, make sure that my opacity is at a lighter value so that I can feather this in. And then I'm just gonna come around the top part of the rock and paint out the bright curve to bring back the darker rock so that I can add a little bit of shape to this. Let's turn this on and off and see how this is working. So if I turn this on and off, we'll see, let's zoom in a little bit. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more and maybe take my brush a little bit smaller and paint a little bit more of this in so that we're really adding some shape. The top part of this rock is darker, the crevices are darker, and the bottom part of the rock is catching the light from the water. Let's go back to this layer mask here, paint a little bit more in. I'm going to go fit in window with Command or Control 0, and we can turn this on or off. And you can see how much more dimension this has now because we added that curve in there. If you're going to be really meticulous about your composites, you really need to check your mask edges for any layers that have layer masks. So let's select this rock layer and zoom in really close and see what the edges of this look like when we're in real close. It doesn't look too bad, but it is a little bit rough around the edges. So there's a way that we can fix that really easy here. If we select the layer mask, then our properties change to the layer mask properties, and we have this option to feather. So I'm going to crank the feather up a little bit and see how much nicer this edge starts looking. And this is completely non-destructive. Can come back and change it at any time. But this is a nice way to just fine tune it right at the very end to just check that mask edge, and that's looking great now. My composite's looking great, and I could say that I'm done with it at this point. But I want to add a texture layer to it to personalize it just a little bit more. I've installed an add-on to my Photoshop CC called Adobe Paper Texture. I find it under Window Extensions, Adobe Paper Texture Pro. It's a great add-on that if you do composites, you're definitely going to want to get this. So let me show you how to go find that. If you go to adobe.com while you're signed into your Creative Cloud account, you get a personalized landing page like this that shows your name and your profile pic. And this is the easiest way to find the add-ons because there's a link to it right here in this list. Click on add-ons. It'll take you to an Adobe site with all kinds of things that you can add to your Creative Cloud applications. Much of this is free. You have a search bar here, and I'm just going to type in paper texture, and that should bring up the add-on that I'm using. Adobe Paper Textures Pro. This is where you'll get it, download it, install it, and then you'll have the same panel that I'm demonstrating in the tutorial. Okay, this is super easy to use. The only thing you need to do is decide where you want the texture layer to go. And I want the texture layer to be above the water and the lake, but below the rock. So I'm going to select the top water layer because the texture layer will get added above that. And then I just pick a texture that I want. And I like this texture down in the bottom left corner because it kind of darkens the edges. So I'm just going to click on it and it will run a script and scale it and apply that. Oh, that's so awesome. The only thing that I don't like about this is this little white fringe that's kind of around the edges. I'll scale out a little bit so we can see this. So I'm just going to scale it up just a tiny bit. So Command T or Control T puts you in the transform mode, and I'll just pull the edges out a little bit so I don't get that white hanging out there, and then commit that. And there we go. What do you think? Pretty happy with that. Not exactly like what we started with, but nevertheless, I think it's a pretty interesting composition. And I hope you learned something and are inspired to try one of your own. Drop me a note and let me know.